You have been told that honey and sugar are basically the same thing, that honey is just sugar with good branding. But what if the Quran dedicated an entire verse to one of them, and science spent decades proving why? Most people reach for sugar every single day without thinking. It is in the coffee, in the bread, in the cereal marketed as healthy, in the yogurt labeled as low-fat. Sugar is the invisible substance that built the modern food industry and quietly dismantled the health of an entire civilization. Honey, on the other hand, has been part of human healing since before recorded history. Ancient Egyptians used it on wounds. Greek physicians prescribed it for illness. And 1400 years ago, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, recommended it with such consistency and such specificity that scholars of Islamic medicine have studied his words ever since. But here is what most people, including most Muslims, do not know. The difference between honey and sugar is not just about calories or sweetness levels. It goes deeper than that. Structurally, biochemically, hormonally, and spiritually, these two substances are not the same, not even close. Today, we are going to look at exactly what separates them. We will go through what the Quran says, what the Prophet said, what modern science has found, and what it all means for the choices you make every single day in your kitchen. By the end of this video, the way you look at sweetness will have changed permanently. Let us start at the beginning. What the Quran actually says about honey. The Quran does not mention sugar. Not once. It does not mention refined sweeteners, processed syrups, or extracted sucrose. But it does give honey something extraordinary. It gives honey its own ayah, its own verse, in one of the most detailed descriptions of a natural substance in the entire book. And your Lord inspired to the bee, take for yourself among the mountains, houses, and among the trees, and in that which they construct. Then eat from all the fruits, and follow the ways of your Lord laid down for you. There emerges from their bellies a drink of varying colors, in which there is healing for people. Indeed, in that is a sign for a people who give thought. Surah An-Nahl, 1668-69. Read that again, slowly. Allah is describing the entire process of honey production, the bee building its home, gathering from flowers, following divine guidance, and then identifies what comes out of that process as a drink in which there is healing for people. The Arabic word used is shifa, healing. Not nutrition, not sweetness, healing. And then Allah closes the verse with a phrase he uses repeatedly in the Quran when describing something that deserves deep contemplation. Indeed, in that is a sign for a people who give thought. This is an invitation. The Quran is telling you to think about this, to investigate it, to not pass over it lightly. This verse was revealed over 14 centuries ago. At that time, no one had a microscope. No one had studied glucose metabolism or enzyme activity or antimicrobial compounds. The claim that honey contains healing was a statement of divine knowledge, not human observation. And for centuries, believers accepted it on that basis alone. What happened when science finally arrived is one of the more remarkable stories in the history of natural medicine. What the Prophet said, the prophetic prescription. The Quran gave honey its status. The Prophet, peace be upon him, gave it its daily application. And the Hadith on honey are among the most authenticated medical narrations in the entire prophetic tradition. Make use of the two remedies, honey and the Quran. Ibn Majah, 3452, authenticated. He placed honey alongside the Quran as a remedy. That pairing is not casual. It reflects the prophetic understanding that healing has both a spiritual and a physical dimension, and that Allah provided for both. Honey is a remedy for every illness, and the Quran is a remedy for all illness of the mind. Therefore, I recommend to you both remedies, the Quran and honey. Sahih al-Bukhari, 5684. The phrase used, a remedy for every illness, mirrors the language the Prophet used for black seed. In Islamic medicine, this is understood not as a literal claim that honey cures every specific disease in isolation, but as a recognition of its broad-spectrum healing capacity and divine endorsement. It is a medicine with the highest possible prophetic recommendation. The Prophet, peace be upon him, also had a documented personal practice with honey. He is reported to have consumed a drink of honey and water, known as naki, in the morning before eating. He recommended honey for digestive complaints. He used it when someone came to him reporting stomach trouble. The Sunnah around honey is not theoretical. It was lived, daily, and specific. There is also the famous account in Sahih al-Bukhari, where a man came to the Prophet reporting that his brother had a stomach ailment. The Prophet told him to give him honey. The man returned saying the honey had not helped. The Prophet responded and told him to give him honey again. When the man returned a third time, the Prophet said, "Allah speaks the truth, and your brother's stomach lies." The man gave honey once more, and the brother recovered. This story is not just a medical account. It is a lesson in trust, in the honesty of divine prescription, in not abandoning a remedy because it did not work instantly. The Prophet's confidence in honey was not shaken by apparent delay. His trust was in the source of the guidance, not in his own observation of immediate results. What sugar actually is, the processed truth. Now let us look at what honey is being compared to. Because sugar, the white granules that sit in almost every kitchen on earth, is not a natural substance in the form most people consume it. White refined sugar is sucrose, a disaccharide made of glucose and fructose bonded together, extracted from sugarcane or sugar beet, stripped of all fiber, minerals, vitamins, and plant compounds through an industrial process involving heat, chemicals, and bleaching agents. What arrives in your kitchen is a pure chemical compound, nothing more. Raw sugarcane contains vitamins, minerals, fiber, and plant polyphenols. None of these survive the refining process. White sugar is what remains after everything beneficial has been removed. The human body was not designed to process sucrose in the quantities that modern diets deliver. A single can of a standard soft drink contains the equivalent of approximately 10 teaspoons of sugar. A single serving of flavored yogurt can contain 6 or 7 teaspoons. A bowl of breakfast cereal marketed toward children can carry more sugar per serving than a chocolate biscuit. And here is the physiological problem. When refined sugar enters the bloodstream, it causes a rapid spike in blood glucose. The pancreas responds by releasing a surge of insulin to bring that glucose level back down. This spike and crash cycle, repeated multiple times a day across years and decades, places extraordinary stress on the pancreatic insulin response, promotes fat storage, drives chronic inflammation, and is now understood to be a central driver of the metabolic disease epidemic that characterizes modern life. Type 2 diabetes, obesity, fatty liver disease, cardiovascular disease, dental decay, cognitive decline. The scientific literature connecting excessive refined sugar consumption to these conditions is now vast, consistent, and deeply concerning. The food industry has known about much of this for decades. Investigative journalism and released internal documents have revealed that sugar companies actively funded research designed to shift blame away from sugar and toward dietary fat. During the latter half of the 20th century, an entire generation was told to eat low fat, while sugar quietly replaced fat in processed foods, and the metabolic consequences accumulated silently in hundreds of millions of bodies. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is documented historical fact, and it makes the prophetic guidance around sweetness, the consistent choice of honey over all alternatives, look less like ancient wisdom and more like divine foresight. If you are finding this beneficial so far, consider subscribing to the Prophetic Garden for more content where Islamic wisdom and modern science come together. We cover food, plants, health, and the Sunnah lifestyle, all grounded in authentic sources. Subscribe now and stay with us for the second half of this comparison. What comes next may be the most important part. What honey actually is, the science the Quran pointed to. Now let us look at what honey really is, because most people, even those who prefer honey over sugar, do not fully understand what they are consuming when they eat raw, unprocessed honey. Honey is not simply sweet liquid. It is a biologically complex substance produced by bees through a multi-stage enzymatic process. When a bee collects nectar from a flower, it adds enzymes from its own body to that nectar. These enzymes, primarily invertase and glucose oxidase, begin transforming the raw nectar during the bee's return to the hive. Inside the hive, water is evaporated through a fanning process until the honey reaches a water content low enough to prevent fermentation. The result is a shelf-stable, enzyme-rich, antimicrobial food with a biochemical complexity that refined sugar cannot begin to approach. Raw honey contains the following: glucose and fructose in free form, meaning they do not need to be broken down by the body before absorption. Over 200 biologically active compounds, including flavonoids, phenolic acids, and carotenoids, enzymes including diastase, invertase, catalase, and glucose oxidase, trace amounts of B vitamins and vitamin C, minerals including calcium, magnesium, potassium, iron, zinc, and selenium, amino acids, prebiotics that support gut bacterial diversity, and hydrogen peroxide produced enzymatically, which gives raw honey its antimicrobial properties. That last point deserves particular attention. Hydrogen peroxide production is one of the mechanisms through which raw honey actively kills bacteria. Studies have demonstrated honey's effectiveness against over 60 species of bacteria, including antibiotic-resistant strains such as MRSA. Medical-grade honey, Manuka honey, being the most widely studied, is now used in clinical wound care settings, in hospitals across the United Kingdom, Australia, and increasingly in the United States. A review in the Asian Pacific Journal of Tropical Biomedicine documented honey's antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and wound-healing properties, attributing them to its unique enzyme content, pH, osmolarity, and hydrogen peroxide production. The Quran said, "In it there is healing for people." The laboratory confirmed, it kills drug-resistant bacteria, heals wounds, reduces inflammation, and protects cells from oxidative damage. These are not the properties of a sweetener. These are the properties of a medicine. The Prophet was right to treat it as one. The glycemic difference, why it matters for every Muslim. One of the most important practical differences between honey and sugar is how each affects blood glucose, and by extension, insulin. This is not a minor technical detail. It is the central mechanism through which your daily food choices either protect or damage your metabolic health over time. Refined white sugar, sucrose, has a glycemic index of approximately 65. When sucrose enters the digestive system, it must first be split by the enzyme sucrose into its component parts before absorption. This splitting happens quickly, and the resulting glucose floods the bloodstream rapidly, triggering a significant insulin response. Raw honey, because its sugars are already in free form, pre-split by the bee's own enzymes during production, behaves differently. The glycemic index of raw honey ranges between 45 and 64, depending on its floral source and composition. Some varieties, particularly darker honeys with higher fructose content, have glycemic indices considerably lower than white sugar. More importantly, honey contains compounds that appear to moderate the glycemic response beyond what glycemic index alone would predict. Research published in the Journal of Medicinal Food found that honey consumption resulted in lower blood glucose spikes compared to equivalent amounts of sucrose or glucose, and that honey appeared to improve insulin sensitivity markers in some subjects. Other studies have examined honey's effect on HbA1c, a measure of long-term blood sugar control, with encouraging results in certain populations. This does not mean honey is a food for diabetics to consume freely. Anyone with blood sugar management concerns should work with their physician, but the difference in how the body processes honey versus refined sugar is real, measurable, and significant, particularly when you consider the accumulative effect of daily choices across years of life. The Prophet, peace be upon him, consumed honey regularly. He did not consume refined sugar. It did not exist in its modern form. But the prophetic dietary pattern kept insulin spikes low, prioritized natural whole foods, and used sweetness as medicine rather than as industrial flavoring. That pattern is aligned with everything modern metabolic science is now recommending. The gut, the microbiome, and the prophetic insight. There is one more dimension of this comparison that most discussions miss entirely, and it may be the most important one of all. The human gut contains approximately 38 trillion bacteria, a community so vast and so critical to human health that scientists now refer to it as a separate organ. This gut microbiome influences digestion, immunity, mood, mental health, inflammatory response, and metabolic function. Its diversity is its strength. When it is disrupted, When beneficial bacterial species are reduced and harmful ones dominate, the consequences cascade through the entire body. Refined sugar feeds the wrong bacteria. High sugar consumption is consistently associated with reduced gut microbiome diversity, overgrowth of harmful species, including Candida, increased intestinal permeability, sometimes called leaky gut, and systemic inflammation originating in the gut lining. The connection between sugar consumption and deteriorating gut health is one of the most active areas of research in nutritional science. Honey does the opposite. Raw honey contains oligosaccharides, short-chain carbohydrates, that function as prebiotics. Prebiotics are food for beneficial gut bacteria, particularly lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species. Studies have demonstrated that honey consumption increases populations of these protective bacteria while simultaneously suppressing harmful species. Honey does not just avoid the damage that sugar causes, it actively repairs the environment that sugar destroys. The Prophet, peace be upon him, prescribed honey for stomach ailments and digestive complaints. He was describing the outcome, relief of digestive distress, without knowing the mechanism. The mechanism, we now understand, involves the gut microbiome. Honey heals digestive problems in part because it restores the bacterial balance that poor diet disrupts. This is the pattern that appears again and again when we examine the prophetic recommendations through a modern scientific lens. The prophet gave the prescription. The mechanism was invisible to him because no human being at that time had the tools to see it. But the outcome was observable, repeatable, and true. And when science finally developed the tools to look inside the body, what it found was exactly what the prophet had described from the outside. Honey in Islamic history, from the prophet's table to the physician's clinic. The relationship between honey and Islamic civilization is not limited to a single hadith. It runs through the entire intellectual and medical tradition that Islamic scholars built over centuries. Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, one of the greatest scholars of Islamic medicine, dedicated an extensive section of his landmark work, Zad al-Ma'ad, Provisions for the Hereafter, to honey. He described its effects on the stomach, its ability to clear the digestive tract, its role in preserving other foods and medicines mixed with it, and its value for the elderly and for those in cold climates. He distinguished between different types of honey based on their color, source, and season, a level of classification that reflects sophisticated medical thinking rather than general enthusiasm. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, the 11th century Islamic physician whose Canon of Medicine became a foundational medical text in both the Islamic world and medieval Europe, also documented honey extensively. He recommended it as a preservative for medicines, as a wound treatment, and as a remedy for coughs and respiratory ailments. His documentation came from clinical observation across a medical career that shaped the history of medicine on 2 continents. The Islamic world was using honey clinically, systematically, with dosage and indication centuries before the European pharmaceutical tradition existed in any organized form. When the Prophet directed his companions to honey, he was not offering folk wisdom. He was establishing the first chapter of a medical tradition that would span 1,000 years and produce some of the greatest physicians in human history. What this means for your daily life. We have covered a great deal of ground: Islamic text, prophetic practice, biochemistry, metabolic physiology, gut science, and medical history. Now let us bring all of it down to the practical question. What do you actually do with this information? First, if you currently consume significant amounts of refined sugar, understand that you are not simply indulging a preference. You are participating in one of the most widespread and documented dietary harms of the modern era. The science is clear. Excess refined sugar drives inflammation, metabolic disease, and gut deterioration. Reducing it is not a lifestyle preference. It is a health imperative. Second, honey is not a license to consume sweetness without restraint. The Prophet, peace be upon him, modeled moderation in all things. He consumed honey regularly, but not excessively. The Sunnah is not just what he ate, it is how much he ate. His quantities were always moderate. His lifestyle was active. His overall dietary pattern was dominated by whole, simple, unprocessed foods. Honey fits into that pattern as a medicine and a sweetener, not as something to pour into everything. Third, not all honey is equal. The healing properties described in the Quran and the Hadith belong to raw, unprocessed, unheated honey from natural sources. Most commercial honey sold in supermarkets has been heated to extend shelf life and improve appearance. Heating above approximately 40 degrees Celsius destroys enzymes, reduces antimicrobial activity, and degrades many of the beneficial compounds. If you are using honey as medicine, as the Prophet used it, it must be raw. Look for honey labeled raw and unfiltered, sourced from a trusted beekeeper if possible. Fourth, consider the intention. The Prophet, peace be upon him, consumed honey, knowing it was a gift from Allah. The Quran described its production as divine guidance to the bee. When you spoon raw honey into warm water in the morning, you are not just making a health choice. You are participating in a practice that connects you to the Prophet's table, to Quranic language, and to the acknowledgement that every healing comes ultimately from Allah. That intention, that niyyah, transforms a simple, daily habit into an act of worship. This is what Tib al-Nabawi, the medicine of the Prophet, actually means. It is not just about which substance is healthier. It is about approaching the body, food, and healing with consciousness, with gratitude, with the awareness that the body is a trust from Allah and that caring for it is an act of obedience. A word on exaggeration. What we must not claim. Before we close, there is something important to say clearly, because in the enthusiasm around prophetic medicine, certain claims are sometimes made that go beyond what the evidence, Islamic or scientific, actually supports. Honey is not a cure for every disease in the clinical sense. The prophetic statement that it is a remedy for every illness is understood by scholars of Islamic jurisprudence and medicine to reflect its broad healing capacity and divine endorsement, not a literal guarantee of cure for every specific condition in every individual. Ibn al-Qayyim himself discussed this nuance at length. Honey should not replace prescribed medical treatment for serious conditions. A Muslim who has diabetes, cancer, heart disease, or any other significant illness should work with qualified physicians. Using honey as an adjunct, as a supportive practice alongside proper medical care, is reasonable and consistent with the Sunnah. Using it as a reason to refuse treatment is not, and the Quran itself teaches us this balance. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was asked whether using medicine negated tawakkul, trust in Allah. He responded by saying that medicines do not change the decree of Allah, but that Allah has made cures, and He has made illness, and using the means He provided is itself part of trusting in Him. The believer uses every means Allah provided. Honey is one of them. Medicine is another. And above both is the decree of Allah. The bottom line. We began with a question that most people dismiss before they even consider it. Is honey really different from sugar? The answer, from the Quran, from the Prophet, and from the laboratory, is yes. Profoundly, structurally, biochemically, and spiritually different. Sugar is an industrial extraction, stripped of everything the plant originally contained, concentrated into a pure compound that the human metabolic system was never designed to process in the quantities the modern world delivers. Its consequences are written in the chronic disease statistics of every industrialized nation on Earth. Honey is a divinely endorsed, enzymatically complex, antimicrobial, prebiotic-containing, multi-compound healing substance that the Quran described as containing shifa, healing, 14 centuries before a single study confirmed it. The Prophet consumed it daily. The greatest physicians of Islamic civilization documented it systematically, and the modern laboratory has spent decades discovering the mechanisms behind what they already knew. The shocking truth of this comparison is not that honey is better than sugar. That part is not surprising once you understand what each substance actually is. The shocking truth is how long the modern world spent being told the opposite, while the guidance was sitting in a book that over 1 billion people hold in their homes. Start with one change. Replace refined sugar in your morning drink with raw honey. Make it small. Make it consistent. Make it intentional. And let that single daily act become the beginning of a different relationship with sweetness, one rooted not in manufactured desire, but in prophetic practice and divine guidance. Every healing comes from Allah. The honey is only the means, and the means were chosen, endorsed, and preserved across 14 centuries for exactly this moment when you need them. May Allah grant you health, barakah in what you eat, and the wisdom to choose what He has already approved. Ameen. If this video was beneficial, share it with someone who still reaches for the sugar jar without thinking. Leave a comment telling us, are you switching to raw honey? And subscribe to the Prophetic Garden, because this is the kind of content we are here to bring you every single week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.